You heard of wildfire?
Of course.
The Mad King was obsessed with it. He meant to rise again, reborn as a dragon, turn his enemies to ash.
Hey everyone, Crowboot's daughter here, and if you click this video, you have reached the Disputed Lands. In today's video, I am bringing you part 3 of our Azor Ahai prophecy analysis. In part 2, we examined the third head of the dragon, and how Euron will fulfill this role through his upcoming arcane ritual, thereby awakening and becoming this evil aspect of the original Azor Ahai, known in legend as the Night's King or Bloodstone Emperor. And with that out of the way, the real question that remains is how Euron will perform this sacrifice, and what Euron will be doing to awaken this dragon from stone. Links to both part 1 and 2 can be found in the description box below. Now let's get started. So Euron is attempting to awaken and become a metaphorical dragon, an evil aspect of Azor Ahai, and to accomplish this, he is planning something terrible. From what we know so far, it involves the sacrifice of several priests of different faiths, as well as Thalia Flowers, who was pregnant with his unborn son, who are all tied to the prows of several ships in Euron's fleet. In part 2, we determined that the target for his ascension to occur will likely be the Hightower on Battle Isle, and we can assume that fire will likely be part of this ritual, as Azor Ahai is foretold to be reborn amidst smoke and salt. And we have Aeron in the Forsaken chapter having a vision of the longships of the Ironborn, adrift and burning on a boiling blood-red sea, and the sacrifices are all tied to the prows of those ships. Azor Ahai is also known as the Warrior of Fire, so it would be a completely missed opportunity if fire wasn't an integral part of this conjuring. So basically, the components of the ritual we can deduce so far are a sacrifice, the Hightower, and fire, which isn't a lot to go off of at this point. But there are several things left to consider, as there are a couple clues to suggest that the fire at the top of the Hightower's beacon will be the fire used for this ritual. But in order to identify these clues, we must first examine what our author is doing in the dreamscape. As mentioned in part 2, there have been several characters, such as Melisandre, Moqorro, and Aeron, who are being sent visions of Euron's upcoming invasion of Oldtown. Much in the same way, the Red Wedding was broadcast out in visions to several characters before it had even taken place. A while back, A Song of Ice and Fire subreddit moderator, Bookshelf Stud, wrote a post examining this phenomena called Ripples in the Dreamscape. George R. Martin shows his hand, which is linked in the description box below, and suggested that certain heinous and significant events can send shockwaves touching those sensitive to it through dreams and visions. As mentioned in both part 1 and part 2, we know of at least 2 Targaryens who had the notion that they themselves could be transformed into dragons upon their fiery deaths. Both Joe Magician and Robert from InDeep Geek have excellent videos on the topic examining this phenomena, suggesting that both Aerys and Aerion were likely influenced by a combination of prophecy and of visions of seeing Dany hatching dragons in Khal Drogo's funeral pyre, with the obsession and the misinterpretation of these visions and dreams ultimately leading to their downfall.
Over there, in that urn, the ashes of Aerion Targaryen. Aerion Brightflame, they call them. He thought drinking wildfire would turn him into a dragon. He was wrong. And of course, there's the Mad King.
But after understanding that Euron is attempting this ritual and transformation into a prophesied dragon of sorts, if this is the case, then we need to take a closer look at these 2 characters who had the notion that they would do the same. Because if this is what they had believed, then it wasn't Dany's funeral pyre they saw. It was Euron's. And with Aerion in particular, in case you hadn't noticed, our author has done a little legwork in welcoming us to compare the 2 characters. Like Euron, Aerion Targaryen was said to be attractive and comely, and would even be congenial in the company of certain people, but in truth, Arion was monstrous, vain, and cruel. Arion is also described as being a dabbler in the black arts in the World Book, and just as Euron was sent into exile by his father for his cruelty, Arion's father, King Maekar, would also exile Arion for his cruel actions. When comparing the two characters, it seems both have similar archetypes when it comes to their nature, but we also see parallels with certain life events, and even certain passages. "It was me who taught you how to pray, little brother. Have you forgotten? I would visit your bedchamber at night when I had too much to drink. You shared a room with Urigon high in the sea tower. I could hear you praying from outside the door." "Egg," said Dunk, "I will be fighting your own brothers." "You won't hurt Daeron, though," the boy said. "He told you he'd fall down. And Arion? I remember when I was little, he used to come to my bedchamber at night and put his knife between my legs. He had too many brothers, he'd say. Maybe one night he'd make me his sister. Then he could marry me." So, after understanding Euron is a man intent on transforming himself into a prophesied dragon of sorts, it makes sense we would find a parallel character who had attempted to do the same. And just as we have been discussing the 3 heads of the dragon in previous videos, another hint can be found in Arion's personal sigil, which is a dragon with 3 distinct heads. And the common thread between both Arion and Aerys' attempts to actualize this transformation was the use of wildfire. And I'm not sure if you were aware, but wildfire will also be present at both the place and the time of Euron's ascension. In Fire and Blood, there is a confusing passage when Maegor is threatening to burn Oldtown, and Oldtown is preparing for Maegor the Cruel's inevitable attack. Led by Sir Morgan Hightower, a younger brother of the Lord of Oldtown, 200 warrior sons spilled forth from their chapter house to defend his high holiness, surrounding the starry sept with a ring of steel. Atop the high tower, the great beacon turned a baleful green as Lord Martin Hightower called his banners. Oldtown waited for the dawn and the coming of the dragons. So the Hightower turned a baleful green when the Hightower Lord called his banners. When Fire and Blood was published, this was some new and slightly confusing information. The Hightower's flame turned green? It was an obscure detail with not a lot of explanation. But Episode 5 of House of the Dragon confirmed that the Hightower does become green when the Hightower calls its banners to war.
The beacon on the high tower. Do you know what color it glows when Oldtown calls its banners to war?
Green.
And in Westeros, there is only one green fire: wildfire. And this baleful green description is an exact match for how the wildfire during the Battle of the Blackwater is described. So we have Aerion Brightflame drinking wildfire, believing it will transform him into a dragon. And we have Aerys wanting to blow up King's Landing with wildfire, believing he will be transformed into a dragon. And at the very place where Euron's transformation will occur, we will have the Hightower beacon lit with wildfire. And judging by the actions of both Aerion and Aerys, who believe they would not die, but rather be transformed, Euron will likely also be sacrificing himself, which makes sense of this line where Euron mentions making a leap of faith from a tall tower. "When I was a boy, I dreamt that I could fly," he announced. "When I woke, I couldn't, or so the maester said. But what if he lied? Victarion could smell the sea through the open window. Though the room stank of wine and blood and sex, the cold salt air helped to clear his head. What do you mean?" Euron turned to face him, his bruised blue lips curled in a half smile. "Perhaps we can fly. All of us. How will we ever know unless we leap from some tall tower?" The wind came gusting through the window and stirred his sable cloak. There was something obscene and disturbing about his nakedness. No man ever truly knows what he can do unless he dares to leap. There's the window. Leap. Victarion had no patience for this. His wounded hand was troubling him. "What do you want?" "The world." Firelight glimmered in Euron's eye. his smiling eye. So let's just return to what we know about our ritual components. We know that this ritual will occur at the Hightower, and we know that it will likely involve fire. We also know that both Arian and Ares attempted to transform themselves into dragons with wildfire, and we know that the beacon at the top of the Hightower will be lighted by wildfire, meaning that the fire used for this ritual will be the beacon fire. We also know that Euron's faith and self-sacrifice will be needed, as both Ares and Arian believed giving themselves to the fire would cause their transformation and rebirth. And we also have Euron's statement of leaping from a tall tower, insinuating that he must make a great risk in order to be rewarded. But we also have Euron's comments of a new god being born from the graves and charnel pits in the Forsaken chapter, which is plural, meaning the sacrifice of not one, but many. And we also have Ares' comments of wanting the greatest funeral pyre of them all. Ares meant to have the greatest funeral pyre of them all, though if truth be told, I do not believe he truly expected to die. Like Arian Brightflame before him, Ares thought the fire would transform him, that he would rise again, reborn as a dragon, and turn all his enemies to ash. So this isn't going to be just Euron. In addition to Euron, this is going to be the sacrifice of many. And we also have priests lashed to the prows of the ships in the waters below. And there are a couple ways these holy men could be sacrificed. Euron could hope they all die during the battle while tied to the prows of these ships. Then Euron might ascend the Hightower and enter the flame. But simply lashing them to the prows would not be a guarantee of their death. So maybe their throats will just be slit before they sail for battle. But if these holy men with holy blood strapped to their ships are an intended part of this ritual sacrifice, then they will likely need to be part of the same sacrificial fire. So the ships with sacrifices and Euron will likely all be heading to the same place where this conjuring is to occur, the Hightower. And it just so happens that 3 of those sacrifices are lashed to Euron's ship. So we know that if the Hightower is where Euron is headed, then they will be on their way there as well. And now this is where it gets interesting. In part 2, we discussed how George R. R. Martin had drawn inspiration for the Hightower in Old Town from the Green Angel Tower of Tad Williamson's Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn series, where the Storm King Enneluki was to be reawakened. But what you might not be aware of is that another source of inspiration for the Hightower is the Lighthouse of Alexandria. The Lighthouse of Alexandria was built over 2,000 years ago, and for many centuries it was one of the tallest man-made structures in the world, and is listed as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Whereas in A Song of Ice and Fire, the Hightower, which also serves as a lighthouse, is also the tallest man-made structure, and is listed as one of Lomas Longstrider's wonders made by man. And while the Hightower is located in Old Town, which is the home of the Citadel and the center of learning in the West, the city of Alexandria was also the center of knowledge and learning at the time, with its renowned library where philosophers, mathematicians, and scholars of the ancient world flocked. The influence of this ancient real-world tower is rather obvious once it is identified. However, the lighthouse is no longer in existence, and was eventually destroyed by a series of earthquakes over hundreds of years due to being situated near 2 separate fault lines. And with the Hightower's fictional influence in Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, we see that the Green Angel Tower also met a similar fate, as it collapsed due to violent shaking during the reawakening ritual of the Storm King. So in both of Martin's inspirations for the Hightower, we have both towers collapsing. In the real-world example, the lighthouse fell due to earthquakes, and in the fictional example, in Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, Green Angel Tower was shook until it collapsed during the Storm King's reawakening. So, if the Hightower is inspired by these 2 towers, well then maybe our author might have had this in mind for the Hightower as well. Let's take a look. In Melisandre's vision of the upcoming Ironborn invasion, she sees towers crumbling. Visions danced before her, gold and scarlet, flickering, forming, and melting and dissolving into one another. Shapes strange and terrifying and seductive. She saw the eyeless faces again, staring out at her from sockets weeping blood. Then towers by the sea, crumbling as the dark tide came sweeping over them, rising from the depths. Another hint can also be found in semi-canon. HBO's Game of Thrones History and Lore animated series was overseen by lore master Brian Cogman, who consulted with George R. R. Martin for both Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. And occasionally, in the History and Lore series, you will find little things that have been added that might be a clue to future developments. And at the end of the Old Town chapter, something very peculiar is suggested by Qyburn: the ground shifting and the Hightower falling.
Old Town is a city for old men and old beliefs. But the world is changing. No matter how high the tower, the clouds will not hold it up if the ground shifts beneath it.
And while this could be the writers just having fun, knowing that the Hightower will be the epicenter for this arcane ritual and reawakening, this could in fact be a foreshadowing of things yet to come. Another hint can also be found in the Titan of Braavos. The Titan of Braavos can easily stand in symbolically for the Hightower due to its size, location, and purpose. Both are enormously tall structures located on islands listed as man-made wonders of the world by Lomas Longstrider, and they both serve as beacons for oncoming ships. And while the spirit of an aspect of Azor Ahai may rest in the Hightower, a hint to this can be found in the parallel beacon of the Titan, which is an enormous statue of a warrior holding a broken sword. And as we've discussed in my broken sword video, a broken sword is very much a symbol of Azor Ahai. And just as the Titan is a stand-in for the Hightower and a hint of what rests inside, we have Mad King Ares, you know, the other guy that wanted to transform himself into a dragon with wildfire, once threatening to build the largest war fleet in the history of the world to bring the Titan to his knees. And if the Hightower were to fall, if this is the case, then this would indeed make the Hightower the greatest funeral pyre of them all. Because if these sacrifices are to be given to the flame at the same time of Euron's ascension, then the blaze of the Hightower beacon would need to be brought down onto them, which would make sense of Aeron's visions of seeing the Ironborn ships adrift and burning with the sea boiling. And this is where it gets even more interesting. In Old Town, we do have something of a Chekhov's gun, Sam's broken war horn. If you recall, Sam has in his possession a cracked war horn that was found along with a cachet of dragonglass buried beneath the fist of the first men. And this horn is one of the few things Sam brought with him on his journey to Old Town that is still in his possession. And while Sam thinks this is just an old broken horn, there are many in the fandom who believe this to be the fabled Horn of Winter, capable of waking giants from the earth and bringing down the wall. And while there are many theories as to what waking giants from the earth could mean, and how this could bring down the wall, one of the more popular schools of thought suggested by fans for years is that waking giants is potentially an allusion to earthquakes. And if you examine the World Book's discussion of the Hammer of the Waters closely, you will see that waking giants is a metaphor our author has even used to describe earthquakes. And the old gods stirred, and giants awoke in the earth, and all of Westeros shook and trembled. Great cracks appeared in the earth, and hills and mountains collapsed and were swallowed up. In A Dance with Dragons, we also see an instance where a literal giant, One-One, is awoken in the Grove of Nine Werewoods, and we see another symbolic allusion to earthquakes, likening the giant to a boulder coming to life, and when he slams his maul to the ground, the impact causes the ground to shake. And when he stirred, it was as if a boulder had come to life. He heaved himself into a sitting position with a snort, pawing at his eyes with hands as big as hams to rub the sleep away, until he saw Iron Emmett, his sword shining in his hand. Roaring, he came leaping to his feet, and one of those huge hands closed around a maul and jerked it up. Ghost showed his teeth in answer. Jon grabbed the wolf by the scruff of the neck. We want no battle here. His men could bring the giant down, he knew, but not without cost. Once blood was shed, the wildlings would join the fray. Most or all would die here, and some of his own brothers too. This is a holy place. Yield, and we— The giant bellowed again, a sound that shook the leaves in the trees, and slammed his maul against the ground. The shaft of it was 6 feet of gnarled oak, the head a stone as big as a loaf of bread. The impact made the ground shake. In addition to this, the godfather of Euron theorists, Poor Quentin, in his Eldritch Apocalypse theory, has long been suggesting that the Horn of Winter will be used by Euron during this ritual of ascension for some time now. And Marwyn, due to his possession of a glass candle, was already aware of Sam's coming as well as many of the events and ordeals happening in the north. And if the fandom's discussion of Urathon Nightwalker holds true, then Euron is likely also in possession of a glass candle, with access to the very same knowledge that is available to Marwyn. And just as we are aware that Euron has worked with the Faceless Men in the past, Euron probably has access to that horn, as there is a faceless man posing as Pate who just gave Sam a place to stay right next to him. There's an empty sleeping cell under mine in the West Tower, with steps that lead right up to Walgrave's chambers, said the pasty-faced youth. If you don't mind the ravens quarking, there's a good view of the honey wine. Will that serve? I suppose. He had to sleep somewhere. I will bring you some woolen coverlets. Stone walls turn cold at night, even here. My thanks. There was something about the pale, soft youth that he misliked, but he did not want to seem discourteous. So, in addition to everything we have discussed so far, there is an item in Old Town capable of waking giants from the earth that has long been theorized to be used in this ritual. And if the Night's King is brought back into existence, then the wall will surely fall by his hand, thus keeping in line with George R. Martin's belief that prophecy should come about in unexpected ways. So, when added up, we know that Euron is setting up for an ascension into this evil aspect of the third head of the dragon. We know that the High Tower is the setting for Euron's ascension. We have Targaryens believing that wildfire will bring about a dragon transformation. And we know that wildfire will be present at the place of ascension. We also know that both inspirations for the High Tower fell due to earthquakes and shaking. And we have foreshadowing of the ground shifting beneath the High Tower in Semi-Canon, and we have Melisandre's vision of towers crumbling. We also have Jaime's comments of Aerys wanting the greatest funeral pyre of all. We also have visions of the longships of the Ironborn adrift and burning on a boiling blood-red sea. And we have sacrifices strapped to the prows of those ships in the waters below. We also have an artifact all the way from beyond the wall that has long been theorized to be used in this ritual that Sam just happened to bring with him to Old Town that has the potential to make the earth move and shake. Added up together, we will have the High Tower, the tallest man-made structure in the world, lit from above by a wildfire, with the Horn of Winter causing it to crumble into the sea below, with the embodiment of the Night's King emerging from its death and destruction. Well, that about wraps things up for today. Links to everything discussed can be found in the description box below. And if you like the video and would like to help my channel, please be sure to do all the things. Like, comment, and subscribe. And if you'd like to help my channel even more, there is some exciting news coming out of the Disputed Lands. Channel memberships are now available with the option to get videos 3 days in advance. So if you aren't already a member, please consider becoming a Sworn Sword to receive this and other benefits. I will be doing a new video every month, and my next video will be discussing what House Hightower has been up to. Thank you so much for watching.